Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's crack-a-lack Fantasy Champs? My name is Morgan Colby. Like I said on the last one, Rick is not with us today. He's going to bring you those trade targets that you've been looking for. Okay? Can't wait to hear that show because I gotta start making some trades here. So be sure to check Rick's episode out on Sunday. If you're listening to this, it's probably a Saturday. Hopefully you're enjoying college football. You got the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast off to the side. You're listening to that in your head, going, okay, I got to set these lineups for Sunday while I'm watching Bama or Michigan, or if you're a Buffalo fan, I'm Boston College up here. We don't watch college football in Massachusetts. You think about all of 1,000 people go to those freaking games. But anyway, so yeah, hopefully you're enjoying your Saturday, you're enjoying whatever it is that you're doing, and you're listening to this podcast going, I need some advice on sit players, guys that I should get out of my lineup. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about players you have to sit for week 4. Guys, you got to get out of your lineup. You got to make sure you don't have them in there, because if you do, you're going to get burned. Rick did have a sit last week, Baker Mayfield, that he nailed, and I got dead wrong because I put Baker Mayfield as a start. So hopefully, I keep doing this with quarterbacks because I listed Sammy D as a start. Hopefully Sam Darnold doesn't end up like that, but I'm glad to bring you the sits I have for the week. Before we jump into the main content for this show, check us out on all social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You'll find us there. Just type in the FF Champs Fantasy Champions. You'll find us. You can also find me at Morgan Colby _FF on Twitter. I tweet all kinds of nonsense out. So if you want to follow me, that'd be great. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcast platforms, please leave a review. Share this podcast with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, which you are, I know you are. You're looking at my face right now. Subscribe, click the bell for notifications, like and comment down below. Very simple. Comments and likes help us a lot. Subscriptions help us a lot. It doesn't take just subscribing, though. Be sure to click that bell because you'll get notifications on your phone, on your computer, wherever, and it'll say, hey, Fantasy Champions post the show. And then you can go watch it. But thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We appreciate the support. All right. Without further ado, moving into week 4 here on the season. Moving into week 4 here on the season. Sorry for the pause there. I was checking show notes to see if it was correct. Yes, it is. I have players you have to sit for this week. 6 guys as usual. And you got to get these guys out of your starting lineup. There's just no two ways about it. If you don't get them out of your starting lineup, for the love of everything that is holy and good, you are failing. So let's talk about it. Number 1, this is a softball, lob it out of the park one. And if Zamir White has a good week this week, I'm going to have to come back on here next week and eat my pants because I don't even know how to do this anymore. I ain't going to lie. So Zamir White's been pretty abysmal on the season so far. He's had a tough start. A lot of people thought he was going to be, because he was really the only running back there, that he was going to take over for the Raiders, backfield, and he was going to have a lot of success there. And he just couldn't get the job done. He had 3.4 fantasy points this past week, and I actually want to confirm that is correct for Zamir White. Yes, he only had 3.4 fantasy points. He had 6 fantasy points the week before, 4 the week before that. He's cracked 40% snap percentage just once on the season. It was week 2 with 63% of the snaps. Alexander Mattison has been out-snapping him and outpacing him in the snap department. He has had an average of like 10 carries a game, right around 3.5 yards per carry. And even in week 2, he got 3. He's basically had 5 catches on the season so far, which for PPR purposes, not horrible. But the big thing for Zamir White is what the anticipation was coming into the season is that he would have high volume. What it has been so far is pretty low volume and a pretty low snap percentage, all because Alexander Mattison has been on the field and has been out there. Mattison, not even really getting the huge amounts of snaps to begin with here with this team. But White, Mattison, these guys just haven't been producing fantasy points. And they haven't been really rushing too effectively as well. I had a guy in my league just drop Zamir White. So if he's available in your leagues, I would definitely add him. But Zamir is kind of a little bit of a tougher add. Now, I would say at this point in time, White is just a sittable person. Like, you can't trust him, not only because he's on the Raiders, but also because he just hasn't produced on the season. If I was forced to, with a gun to my head, had to choose one running back on this, in this running back room, it would probably be Madison as of right now. Hopefully at some point White steps out of the realm of being completely irrelevant and terrible, and he starts producing a little bit more. But White was a guy I was like, maybe I should draft him, maybe I shouldn't early in the draft season. I was kind of toiling with that, and I ended on I didn't end up drafting him in a lot of drafts only because I didn't really like the Raiders situation. I right now they're talking about moving off of Gardner Minshew pretty much already and going to Aiden O'Connell. They don't have a quarterback. They don't have a real solution at quarterback. This is kind of a throwaway season for them, and if they're not going to be productive on the offensive side of the ball, guys like Zamir White, guys like Alexander Mattison, guys like Devontae Adams, guys like Jacoby Myers, guys like Brock Bowers even, and I told you to start Bowers, just, it's a tight end. So you can take if they're targeting him 8 times a game and he's getting 7 catches for 50 yards, it don't matter in fantasy football. Tight end gets 11 points, you're good there. So tight end startable, but and obviously Adams and Jacoby Myers might be startable, but it's tough to rely on assets from the Las Vegas Raiders because they just don't have the offensive output and firepower to do that. And if they keep switching quarterbacks, it's going to be tough. It also didn't help the last couple weeks. Like this past week specifically, you get blown out. So not good for them. But he hasn't been good throughout the entirety of the season so far. And he's also, not to mention, going up against Cleveland, who is just ridiculously good on that defensive line. They've only given up 18 fantasy points a game to the running back position. So with a running back room that's giving up a lot of touches to a lot of different guys, and Zamir White not really producing that well, 6-7 fantasy points is probably, I would say, his ceiling for the week. And, if he ends up doing better than that, then who knows, maybe you got a back. But I think at this point, it's kind of panic time on Mr. Zamir White. We're going to head over to the Bucs, and we're going to talk about the other White running back, not in that context, but it's Rashad White. He's going up against Philly. So just to start with the tough matchup, Philadelphia Eagles always have a good defensive front. They've given up 17 fantasy points a game, which is the 22nd easiest matchup. Not a good matchup for Rashad White. But White also, too, Rashad White has also been, and this is going to get confusing if I'm still talking about White, but Rashad White had 16 points week 1, and everyone, you're probably thinking, oh my God, this guy's excellent. And then he had 3 points week 2, 8 points week 3. He's had 70% snap percentage in these 3 weeks, so it's he's had the snap percentage, he's been getting the target share, he's been putting up some decent fantasy numbers, but there's a guy by the name of Bucky Irving that they drafted who has been much more efficient and better with his opportunities than you've seen from Rashad White. And this week, they were talking about how they wanted to get Bucky Irving more opportunity after the game, so that obviously suggests that they're going to probably change Bucky Irving's snap percentage from around 35% and move it up into the 40s to 50s. And if he's splitting snaps with Rashad White's literal only value for most people in fantasy leagues was the fact that he touched the ball 300-something times last year. And if he doesn't do that in games and he's not a high volume play, he's just not efficient enough as a running back to put up good fantasy points on a week-to-week basis, thus making him not startable. So for me, this is another running back play like Zamir White in Rashad White that is sittable to me at this point. And I think until you see how this backfield shakes out, you can't really start Rashad White for the most part. But like I said, even in that context, knowing that he's going to get less opportunity going up against Philly, Really tough matchup. Don't like either one of these guys in the backfield for this week. So I would just sit Rashad White. I sit sit Rashad White, sit Zamir White, and call it a week against those two guys and try to get somebody else in your starting lineup for your running back position. In a league dying, for running backs, man, not having those two work out in any kind of way, shape, or form has kind of sucked. But if you have Bucky Irving, maybe you get something this week. All right, there's your running backs. I mean, I ripped through those running backs in 10 minutes. Let's talk about the next guy. Another guy that I see as maybe an unstartable for at least a few more weeks. Jaylen Waddle versus Tennessee. You have to keep going with Tyreek Hill in your starting lineup on a week-to-week basis because it is Tyreek Hill. And I think Waddle will have games where he is explosive. But if you drafted Jaylen Waddle to be your wide receiver 2 or even your wide receiver 1, it kind of makes it a little bit tougher for you. He had 16 fantasy points week 1, 8 and 6 the following weeks. After Tua got hurt is when things kind of collapsed. This past week against Mike McDonald in Seattle, very tough matchup. But if you actually watch that Miami game, it was a disaster for Jaylen Waddle, and it was a disaster for the Miami Dolphins offensively. He had 5 targets, 4 catches for 26 yards. He has not been producing at the level that you would want to see him produce at. It's likely that Tua will not return until possibly after the bye week in week 7 against Indianapolis. And I don't even know if he's going to start then. So tough situation here for Jaylen Waddle. But I think, to me, it's not necessarily about Tennessee as a matchup, because I think Tennessee, they're a team that is kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of giving up fantasy points. Actually, they're one of the toughest teams against wide receivers on the season so far. Top 3, actually. I didn't expect that. I thought they were in the middle of the pack. But 16 fantasy points a game to the wide receiver position. So not only is it a tough matchup for Jaylen Waddle to begin with, but it's also going to be a game where obviously they're just not going to perform well offensively, and it's going to be tougher on the quarterback play. Now, I do believe there's been a quarterback change from Skylar Thompson to, I think it's Tyrod Taylor, but I'm not entirely sure. Let me just check that real fast because I want to confirm. Tyrod Taylor's on the Jets. I think Miami was going to make a quarterback change this week, but I'm not entirely sure. You can Google that on your own time. But it's not, either way, it's not going to be a good week for Jaylen Waddle versus Tennessee, so you can sit him. Next guy is Xavier Worthy against the Chargers. Now, like I said, just to start off with the matchup against the Chargers have given up 19 fantasy points a game to the wide receiver position. Obviously, there's Rashee Rice there. You have Worthy. You have guys at the tight end position that can make plays, and Travis Kelce. So there's going to be Juju Smith-Schuster's there. So it's like there's going to be guys who get opportunity. The big thing with Worthy is that he's probably the 3rd, maybe 4th option in the target tree. And after the first game of the season, you were really like sitting there going, oh my God, Xavier Worthy's this big breakout player with 20 fantasy points. And we hadn't watched football in a while. We were excited about the NFL season starting. And I told Rick and a lot of people, even though it's fun to pump the brakes, I hate to be that guy that puts a friggin' rain cloud over the situation. After his 20-week performance, if you dig into the numbers, he only had 3 targets and 2 catches. And then he had 1 rushing attempt that was able to bolster his fantasy point output in this game, which caused him to have 20 points because he had 2 touchdowns in his first game in his career. And so a lot of people are like, oh my God, this guy's going to be explosive. He's going to be huge. And once people watched that film and said, hey, this is what Worthy's going to do, they've tried to get him involved in other ways. 4 targets against Cincinnati, 4 targets against Atlanta. They get him some rushing work on the ground, but his snap percentages aren't high enough. He's clearly just a dude that comes in, runs go routes, and takes design to work. And if you read any of Matt Harmon's reception perception stuff, you can kind of tell that that's what Worthy's role was going to be. And that he wasn't going to be, as a shorter receiver, he's not going to be playing in the slot. He's not going to be playing in those areas on the field. And so it makes Xavier Worthy not a high volume target. And like, he doesn't have this. I don't want to say he doesn't have the skill set, because you can always develop and grow the skill set to become that guy. But I don't think he's going to have the skill set, at least this year and early in his career, to get a high volume of work. Especially when you have Travis Kelce and Rashad White there catching most of Patrick Mahomes' passes, which lately has not been a lot. They're going to design work for Xavier Worthy, so there's going to be weeks where he has really good performances. I don't think that's going to be one of them this week, and I think for the time being, with the volatility of Xavier Worthy, it's time to just sit him until you find out. You know what I'm saying? Like, just sit Xavier Worthy until you find out about him and hope that he does at least a little bit better or gets more opportunity. But I don't like I said, those first 3 games of the season, 3, 4, and 4 targets, not what you're looking for. So until you see a sizable increase in snap percentage and target share, I wouldn't really want him in my starting lineup unless you're looking for like a boom play in a deeper league. But especially this week, sit him against the Los Angeles Chargers. Okay, we have 2 more guys. First, I talked about him on the last show, and I actually said that you should start Sam Darnold over him. It's Trevor Lawrence at Houston. Trevor's been on the struggle bus. I ain't gonna lie. Our boy Trevor Lawrence has been on the struggle bus on the season. He has had 11 fantasy points, 13 fantasy points, and 10 fantasy points so far this season. He hasn't thrown for over 225 passing yards on the year. In fact, his first week 3 game and his week 1 game and his week 3 game, I should say, he had 162 and 178 in passing yards. So he's been inefficient. He hasn't really been able to pass the ball well, hasn't scored a lot of touchdowns. For crying out loud, on Monday night when they were playing Buffalo, Mac Jones at the end of the game drove the ball down farther than he had in the game. So, obviously he threw a touchdown, so that's a little bit over dramatic, but Lawrence has been bad, and he hasn't been performing well, and I think at this point he's kind of a streaming option until he has a good matchup. While I do think this is a plus matchup for him where, Houston's going to come out in a get-right game and try to throw the ball over the field and score a ton of fantasy points, Houston is a tough defense, pass rush-wise, and they're going to get after it, and I think it's going to make it tougher on Trevor Lawrence to have a lot of success throwing the ball. I was trying to find the fantasy points per game total here that the Houston Texans give up. They do give up 19 fantasy points a game, so could be a little bit easier of a matchup for Trevor Lawrence, but I think at this point, I don't want to trust or rely on him to score for my team, so I would start Sam Darnold over him this week, and I would just sit him if you have a better quarterback option. If not, I guess you could go with Trevor Lawrence for the week, but yeah, I would start with Trevor Lawrence. I would sit Trevor Lawrence and start Sam Darnold or somebody else if you have that option. And then talking about the last guy, the tight end sit of the week, which Rick usually has, but he is obviously not here. And that is Dalton Schultz versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is kind of a softball because I hate missing the tight end position, but now Schultz will get 400 points going back to the same game against Jacksonville, and talking about this matchup. But Dalton Schultz, while he has a high snap percentage and he's running routes, he only has had on the season a total of 11 targets. So he's averaging about 4 targets a game, somewhere in that vicinity. That is a tougher number to look at for Dalton Schultz if you're looking to start him on a week-to-week basis. So, 4, 4, and 3 from fantasy point totals, not great. Jacksonville, not an easy opponent when it comes to the tight end position. They only give up 5 points a game to the tight end position. So I don't love this game with I don't love this game for Dalton Schultz. I don't think it's going to be positive for him. And I would say there might be more opportunity for him going into this game. So it's not like a strong sit him this week. Like, I'm not like, oh my God, you have to sit him. This is a must sit guy. It's a little bit of more of like he hasn't produced, but without Tank Dell on the field, there is opportunity for Dalton Schultz to maybe get some more workload. I just don't think it's going to be easy for him to have success with how well the Jacksonville Jaguars have done against the tight end position on the season, being one of the hardest opponents for them. So when you look at Dalton Schultz, I really don't think that he's going to be this prolific option this week, but if Tank Dell does miss extended time, Dalton Schultz might be a good tight end to grab off the waiver wire and just as like a pre-ad this week, just to see what he can do moving forward. But yeah, so they're your sits for the week. There you go. They're your starts. They're your sits. Hopefully you enjoy Sunday football. Zamir White, Rashad White, Jaylen Waddle, Xavier Worthy, Trevor Lawrence, Dalton Schultz. Get them out of your lineups. Rick does have another show for you coming up. He's going to talk about trades. Be sure to check that out. Thanks for listening, guys. Enjoy your Sunday.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.